Fire away, Martin.
Um, well, I think I've been successful in at least changing the narrative to some degree in the U.S. That what they have said to me directly is that you're correct. We're not going to be at war with Russia. It's going to be China. But I was surprised because, I mean, pretty much everybody knows where I stand on this stuff. And I was surprised to have gotten a phone call and said, gee, would you, come in? We want to give you a debriefing on Russia. I said, all right, fine. You want to tell me what you're doing? All right, I'll go, and then I was asked if I would draft a peace plan that I thought Putin would actually accept. And I was also asked to use my back channels because they know I have them, into Russia as well. So, so it was enlightening. I think I changed the narrative, explained that, look, Russia has no interest in going in, taking the EU. There's nothing there for them. EU has to get all its energy from Russia, no gold reserves. All they're going to get is a bunch of headaches, and you walk into France and they're going to ask, are you going to pay our pensions? That's about it. And so I think they understood that. But the real kicker here is the fact that, the EU is crumbling right before our eyes. And as you know, when they were creating the euro, I got called into that one too. I tend to get calls in mainly because I was probably the first in foreign exchange from the 70s, so I seem to have been called into just about everything from around the world on that. But the main thing is that I warned the EU that they had to consolidate the debt in order to compete with the dollar. And it was Helmut Kohl at the time, it was Chancellor of Germany, and he took Germany into the euro unilaterally. The German people were never allowed to vote. So he admitted before he died, he acted like a dictator, and had he allowed them to vote, he would have lost 7-3. So his consolidation was basically he would take Germany into the EU, into the euro, which was effectively 25% of the eurozone. But he said no consolidation of the debt, because he thought the German people would feel it as a bailout for Greece and Italy, etc. So I warned them. I said, you have to understand when you're dealing with politicians, they really have no trading experience. And I said, look, if I'm going to pick up the phone and I can say, buy me $10 billion worth of U.S. treasuries, no problem. With Europe, I can't do that. I still have to make the same decision as if the euro isn't there. Do I want Germany? Do I want Italy? Do I want France, etc.? All right, so they really didn't accomplish anything long term. And this is what is the real problem with Europe. And so I think I at least got them to understand that any peace deal is going to be sabotaged by Europe. K-List, in my opinion, is just Lindsey Graham and drag. That's about it. And they need a diversion. So this is about power. And if they do not have an external enemy, then the Eurozone is going to collapse. You've already had France and UK ministers come out and admitted they might need an IMF bailout. Now, as a trader, what happens? We can look just at really even 2010, when Greece got into trouble. What happens? All the traders look to see which bank has the most Greek debt shorted. Okay, so now we're talking about France, which is the second largest, economy in the EU. Britain left, so that's not the real problem for the euro. But if France, even people suspect that they're going to default, all right, the traders are going to do the same thing again. You're going to look at which banks have the most French debt shorted. So, unlike Canada or United States, our banking systems, they have reserves and they use, the government treasuries. Because they never consolidated the debt in Europe, the banks have to be politically correct. So they got a cornucopia of debt of all these different states because there is no single national debt. So you're looking at the problem with Europe. Let's say France gets into trouble. All right. It's the second largest economy. Its debt crisis then undermines the banking system. Add to that, on average, 70% of the pension funds have to have government debt. So you can see what I'm talking about. Europe is crumbling before our eyes. And they won't reform. That's the problem. I could probably fix it in 15 minutes, right? But you're talking about giving up power, and that is like, they start, foaming at the mouth and rolling around in the dirt, but that's really what has to take place. You have to consolidate this debt. Otherwise, the euro is finished. And so instead, they keep beating the war drums over there. Oh, it's Putin, Putin, Putin. He wants to invade Europe. All right. You had France just came out saying that they're opening up for 18-year-olds to volunteer for military service. All right. And Germany, I got woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning today. There are bills going in to start, conscription in Germany. Germany wants to build the largest army in Europe. Again. All right, so there is, look, the computer's going to be right. I've tried my best to defeat my own computer and I lose all the time. All right, it just says that we're going into war and it's going to start, and you're going to see it more in 26, probably really escalate into 27. But, Europe needs an external distraction. Otherwise, the people, they lose their pensions, their bank accounts, and they're going to be storming the parliaments with pitchforks. All right, this is why Europe is already preparing for a digital currency, capital controls. You can look up, just last month, if you're in Europe and you want to leave, you have to list all your accounts worldwide. How much money you got? Where's it at? You've had Ursula, the head of the EU, come out and even say, they can fund their war by taking unused assets from clients, confiscating your accounts. Look, Germany did that in December 22. That's what set off the hyperinflation in 23. I mean, it's history repeats because these people make the same stupid decisions all the time.
In 1922, you're talking, Germany took unused assets, which is people's money that's just sitting in a bank account somewhere?
10%. And they handed out bonds. You can buy the bonds which they defaulted on eBay. And look, that's why when Hitler came to power in 1933, he passed a law. It was illegal to have an account outside of Germany. Because once they confiscated that money in December of 22, anybody with 10% brain function got their money the hell out, transferred to Swiss francs, whatever. All right. So when Hitler came to power in 33, he's trying to bring that money back. So he passes that law. 1934, Switzerland then passes the numbered secret account to protect the Germans. All right. So, I mean, and people don't realize capital controls. UK and Sweden, for example, put capital controls in 1939. All right. Hitler goes into Poland, etc. You know when they were finally rescinded? Britain, I think it was 1979, and Sweden, 1989. 40 years, generally, of capital controls. You need a permission to have an account outside the country.
So these get put in, they ain't going away anytime soon.
No, this gets to be... Look, Europe is very Marxist. You can look up, there's a whole bunch of different academics that all supported Marx, Robinson, Carr, a whole bunch of them, all right? And so the problem is that after World War II, that's what became the dominant philosophy in Europe. And this is why you can look up, go to the, the Federal Reserve database and St. Louis Fed, and just look at a GDP chart of really EU and compare it to the United States. I mean, it's a tiny fraction. I mean, there's just no real long-term economic growth in Europe. I mean, this has been the problem. Everything is regulated to the nth degree, and it's a real problem. And so this is why I say Europe is crumbling right before our eyes. You have NATO out there, which has absolutely no purpose in life whatsoever but to create war. I saw the internal memos. When all the money was going to climate change, they basically said, how do we remain relevant? All right, they only remain relevant by constantly saying, oh, Putin wants to invade Europe, as if he's Khrushchev. All right, Khrushchev was different. That was a philosophical issue. Khrushchev really was, dyed in the wool a communist. He really believed that Marxism and Leninism, that capitalism would collapse and that socialism and communism would prevail. So it was more of a philosophical issue when he said, we will bury you. It wasn't economic. Like, I'm going to invade because you got something I can make money from. And that wasn't the issue. So when NATO constantly says, oh, if Ukraine falls, then Putin will come in and take the rest of Europe. So you better give us 5% of all your GDP. You know, it's just it's a mafia type shakedown. Pay me this for protection, you know.
So if
But
I
I mean,
come all the way, sorry, if I come all the way back to the peace talks in Miami, or not Miami, was it Miami? Sorry, it was in Florida. I forget
yeah,
the peace talks.
going back and forth to Miami and also DC. But
So you have all these peace talks, and you bring up Europe specifically because it's crumbling. They need an outside enemy to deflect or to take everybody's eyes off what's actually happening. And so am I adding this together in the proper way when I go, okay, so the U.S. is trying to broker peace and get rid of war, but Europe really needs the war. So in order for peace to actually happen, it could possibly happen, but the problem is Europe is going to keep trying to spur it on because they need it. So when you look at peace, you go, it's great the U.S. and Russia are talking, but the threat to that deal being brokered is sitting in Europe.
oh, absolutely. I mean, you had Kalis. She came out and said in order for Russia to rejoin the G8, it requires unanimous vote, and she will never allow it to happen. I had sources that she met with the foreign relations minister from China. All right, and she tried to strong arm him into saying, "You tell Russia to surrender and get out of Ukraine, and to stop supporting him." His response was, "We are not prepared to allow Russia to lose." Then the second, he said, because we know we would be next. You know, but this is, you know, it's reality. You know, this is, people like Kalis is, you know, she's just a biased neocon. That's it. I mean, if you look at the Biden administration, we had Blinken, Victoria Nuland, and Garland. All right. All three managed to weasel their way in and usurped American foreign policy. All three claimed that their families were from the Balkan area. All three claimed that their families were personally persecuted by Russia. These neocons, this is, it's a personal vendetta. They have used our country, our foreign policy for personal gain. No different than an insider trading. Look, this is Madeleine Albright. Same stuff. She's the one that got NATO to bomb Serbia. Why? Because the Serbs supported Russia. She also grew up in Czechoslovakia, hated Russians. They always seem to, these people gravitate to power just to exercise personal vendettas, which to me is treason. But, you know, I think I at least succeeded in changing the narrative that Putin is not interested in war. They asked me to use my back channels. I did. I believe the report that I did got on Putin's desk. And about 2 days later, you had Lavrov come out and said publicly, we are willing to guarantee we are not interested in invading NATO. Response from NATO, oh, that's bullshit. They're lying. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I can't change the leadership of Europe. I mean, I've done everything I can in the United States to at least try to stop war. When NATO says, and what they're saying out there, all right, you had Trump make that sarcastic remark. And he said, yes, Russia's a paper tiger. Ukraine, you can keep all your land and go get some more. All right? He wasn't being serious. This is the honest to God BS that is being put out over there by the neocons in NATO. And I mean, you even have a neocon Kinzinger. You can Google it. He said, oh, we can defeat Russia in 3 days. 3 days. I mean, they couldn't even do Iraq in 3 days. I mean, let's get real here. I mean, what is it with these people? I mean, they love war. There's no other explanation. I don't know. I've been to dinner with some of these people. In the meeting, they asked me what was my opinion. I said, look, I think they grew up hating Russia from childhood. And then all of a sudden, what happens? Communism falls. They're no longer communists. They didn't change. All right? They still have to hate. I was in D.C. doing some work for the Reagan administration back then, and the whole G5 stuff. And, that's when Gorbachev basically made his speech and showing that Russia was changing, and Reagan wanted to go meet him. And I can tell you that the neocons couldn't say that he was still a communist. So they said, you can never trust a Russian. And Reagan said, take it, put a sock in your mouth, and he went. He rejected their advice. If he didn't, the Berlin Wall would never have fallen. I don't know. I mean, I think these people just grew up hating communism to the point that they're just pissed off that they never got to, there wasn't this great war to bring down communism. They didn't get to shoot anybody.
Different things on communism. You'd put out on X, China quietly moved away from communism decades ago. They saw it wasn't working and made a change without a public declaration. Yes, the CCP is certainly authoritarian to some degree, but it is a fallacy to call China a communist nation.
Correct.
I've been told China's communist
No.
for my entire life. Not a chance.
Look up what is communism. Communism is the government owns everything. They got more billionaires than we do. All right. And you can look, you'll see that quietly China began to open up with some companies in 1978. China at least understood that it was not working. They gradually tried to loosen the reins. And that turned into Tiananmen Square. Hey, everybody else is getting this, not us. Whereas Russia, the difference between, I would say, the Russian communist and China. I mean, I've observed both. I know, people that even grew up in Eastern Germany and etc. And the difference was that Stalin was much more paranoid. So he actually put out even a propaganda film that telling kids in school that if your parent ever said anything against the state, report them. And one guy did, and he turned him into a national hero and everything. Whereas China didn't do that. China didn't care what you said to your wife. All right. But if you stuck your head up and told the guy next door, they called it the tall poppy syndrome. That one gets cut off. All right. So I would say that that difference was more or less why China was able to rebound faster than Russia. Russia was actually, Stalin had really destroyed the family unit. All right. Also religion. And we're very, Marx, religion is the opium of the masses. Whereas China really didn't do that. So as they relaxed, and they started relaxing gradually in 1978, and that's what exploded in 89. Everybody else is getting this. Why are we not? So, I think that's basically what you see the difference between the two. China at this stage in the game is really the second largest economy. It will surpass the United States. They understand economics. Look, back in even the 97 Asian currency crisis, I was called in by the Bank of China. I went because I wanted to see what the Great Wall was. I thought I would have to listen to a bunch of bureaucrats again. And I was really surprised why they called me rather than somebody from Harvard. Because they were all traders. China had sent these guys out and they worked on the dealing desks in New York, London, Tokyo. Then they went back to run the central bank. So it was funny because when I got back to the States, both the Fed and the Treasury people called me. Gee, what was it like? You're the first person to go there. So I took the knife, stuck it in their back, and I turned it. I said, very interesting. They only hire people with experience. But, it was, they are much more down to earth in that respect. Whereas in the West, we tend to look more at credentials, like they put in Carney for the Central Bank of Canada, and he has no real financial experience. He's just a figurehead. That's it. These people are politicians, and they're taken from one position to the next to the next. But do they really have any experience in doing what is in that industry? And you find it's not. Draghi. I know people that he went and sat in the corner in dealing rooms to try and see how foreign exchange even traded. And they stuck him as the head of the central bank. It's terrible.
I'm gonna pull on your historical knowledge here just for a second. We were talking NATO. We were talking different countries, right? Russia, China, just everything, economics, that type of thing. I know you were sitting behind bars when this was all playing out, or at least the tail end of it. But Gaddafi in Libya, do you know anything about that, or I'm just kind of curious, right? Like you start pulling on different threads, Martin, and all of a sudden different things come. You're like, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. And then you pull on a little bit, and you're like, I don't know. What do you like Gaddafi and what went on there? Was he the awful dictator they try and tell you he was, or do you have a bit of a different background on what that was?
One of the reasons I really went more institutional was we had an office in Geneva. back in the 80s, and I would say it was one giant masquerade party. I actually ended up managing money for Gaddafi twice.
No kidding.
Thought I was dealing with somebody from Saudi Arabia. Then you go through all the shell companies, and it's like, what the hell? I thought I was dealing with the Gayon family in Geneva. Gayon backwards is Noga. They own all the Noga hotels. I was invited to, they had Herald Square in New York. Big built, shopping center, etc. So I was invited to the grand opening of that. Next thing I know, it's I got the FBI in my office asking me where Marcos's gold is. I said, what are you talking about? Well, you're one of the big advisors in gold. Marcos owns that building. How'd you get into? I said, look, I thought somebody else owned it. What can I tell you? I mean, they're all connected. I mean, Marcos and Gaddafi, they were partners in trading positions. I mean, you can't make all this stuff up. I mean, it's just crazy. But as far as even you take, Bill Kristol, who had even spoken at one of our conferences. I know Bill, and back in the 90s, I argued with him. If we take out Saddam Hussein, Assad out of Syria, and Gaddafi, we'll bring peace to the Middle East. I said, you're out of your mind. You've never been there. I have, all right? It's tribal. They don't see themselves as Iraqi or Syrian or Libyan. It's Sunni versus Shiite. It's Druze, it's Kurds. I mean, it's still tribal. All three are now removed. Where's the peace? But they took those three out. You take the Benghazi incident with Hillary Clinton. You can look it up. When they asked her, why was the embassy attacked? Oh, what difference does it make? She wouldn't answer. Why? Because they were using that to funnel arms in to overthrow Gaddafi and Assad in Syria. It was an arms operation. They were using the American embassy there, and that's why it was attacked, and the ambassador was killed, and then Hillary wouldn't answer why it was even attacked. Look, these people have been doing this stuff for a long time. And these neocons have been, everything that they say about Russia, they want to expand, is what they do. Well, he wants to expand, so we'll expand first. All right, so there's plenty of documentation that back in 91, they promised not to expand NATO eastward.
And then, of course, they expand.
Yeah, I mean, all I've ever heard is, they want to invade, so we should do it first. That's it. You can look at General Wesley Clark after 9/11. It's on YouTube. He gave a speech in 2007. And he said he went to the Pentagon after 9/11. He was told that they were going into Iraq. And he openly states in that speech, he asked them, so you connected Saddam Hussein to 9/11? They said, no, we're just going in. And they told him they intended to take out 7 other countries. Look at his speech. I mean, look, this is what these people do. They love war.
Well, it's funny, on this side, Martin, I watch what's being said about Russia. And then I sit and I talk to, I just had Tom and Alex on before you. And then, and of course, yourself on. And, that opens up this whole, for the first well, the majority of my life, I watched, and I was like, oh man, that must be a pretty bad person. And they go and clean it up, and you're right, like nothing takes 3 days. That's funny. But I asked about Gaddafi. I almost had you speechless. I'm like, I think I just made Martin speechless for a second, because like you look back over, you start playing out. I had two Swedish guys on, and they were talking about Olof Palme, the Prime Minister of Sweden back in the day, who got assassinated in '86. And I was born in '86, so I wasn't, like, I'm like, who the heck is that? And they started drawing the comparisons to what Trump is doing now with Russia, to what he was trying to do back in the Cold War with de-escalation, essentially. I'm oversimplifying what they talked about. And I was like, what? Who? And then, you go look up the story, because you're hearing these two Swedish guys, and you're like, no, there it is. Okay. And then I go, okay, what other things have gone on since then that I get told a story, you take the story for what you believe it to be, and you're like, well, now I gotta dig a little bit. And Gaddafi's one of them, right? That he was this authoritarian, awful leader. But if you look just a smidge deeper than that, economically, Libya was on the rise. I mean, it was doing better. I don't know, I'm not from there. I've never been there. But you just look at that and you go, wait a second. Well, if things are getting better, he couldn't have been all awful. And you find out, you're looking at NATO, and what do we talk about here? Well, NATO is trying to justify why they're still there, as people are kind of staring at it going, you said you weren't gonna, expand, you've expanded. You keep calling the one side the evil perpetrator, yet everything you say you're gonna do, you actually don't do, and then you keep doing something that's going to spur on World War III, not de-escalate it. I thought the whole point of NATO was to ensure peace, and I'm oversimplifying that too. And instead, they seem to pop up wherever the war zone is.
Look, Serbia was not part of NATO. Madeleine Albright convinced NATO to go in. Read Colin Powell's memoirs. What did he say about her? She said, we got all this military power, we should be using it. She was another neocon. And she attacked basically Serbia only because Serbs were supporting Russia. All right? Under that same theory, why are they not defending the Donbass? Oh, because they're Russians. Look, these people never tell the truth. What you get in mainstream media is bought and paid for. It really is all fake news. They get, the agenda, what to say, and they do as soon as you read any story, Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked. Really. It's propaganda. All right? Part of that report that I did to shock them into reality, John McCain was at Maidan in 2014. Overthrow your government. We are with you. Victoria Nuland, both ruthless, absolutely ruthless neocons. All right, handing out sandwiches at Maidan. All right, got all this stuff on film. And McCain, this isn't about anything. This is about you and your freedom. All right, and peace. Where have they gotten peace ever since? We had employees there in Kiev and in Donetsk. All right, and they're both in Berlin now. They have not benefited at all from this. It was Victoria Nuland, and just look at the facts. Victoria Nuland picked the government. They installed an unelected government, and then that is the government in Kiev that attacked the Donbass and started the whole war. The people have never been behind this. Then Zelensky gets in there, and just about all my sources over there say the same thing. The election was rigged. Then you had an American journalist over there, Laura. He's the one that said that cocaine was Zelensky was a cocaine head. You had him arrested, thrown in prison. Oh, he died of pneumonia. Really? Zelensky has shut down free speech. Anybody that supports Russia, shut down. This is democracy. He suspends elections. We've had elections during World War I and II. We didn't shut down elections in Britain, United States, Canada. Oh, he shuts them down. His polls are like 23%. I talk to people, even military. I was told that they were sent to the border. They had no knowledge that they were going to invade the Kursk region of Russia. That order came from MI6. They thought they were just going to defend the border. No, they were told to invade. Maybe then Putin will attack NATO and we got World War III. I'm sick of it. I really am sick of it. You know, it's...
So in one breath, you see the peace talks going on. You're, I don't know, this guy right where I sit. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. That's new developments. Maybe there's some light on the horizon. And then in walks Martin with all the different things. Kind of, yeah. Don't hold your breath just yet.
Because it's Europe that I'm fighting against, and I know that, and I've at least got them looking in the right direction. That Russia is not the enemy. And they have actually now said that point blank to my face. We know, you're right. Russia's not the enemy. Putin has no interest in invading Europe. The Russian people do not want to occupy Europe any more than the Canadians want to go occupy Russia or China or whatever. We all just want to sit back and take care of our families. That's it.
I don't think our military's going any very fast there, Martin.
It's crazy. Wars are created by the people at the top, not the average person.
I'm going to bring in another guest. I got the CEO of Bow Valley Credit Union, Brett Olin, here. I'm going to change the conversation into, I guess, monetary policy. But Brett, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, gents. Good seeing you, Martin.
How you doing?
Good.
Now, the reason why this here for the last part of the show, folks, we're bringing Brett in. He's written a paper, Alberta Dollar Currency Transition Plan, and I'll let Brett just outline it. But the two gentlemen I have sitting here, I'm sure Martin can blast holes all through it, and because there's this talk about if Alberta were to separate, would we have our own currency, right? And so Brett Olin's written a paper on it. Brett, maybe you can walk the listeners through it.
Sure, and actually I'm really looking forward to you blowing holes in it. Please humble me, Martin, on this. Really do. So, like it or love or hate the idea of Alberta separation, this is a very real possibility. Mm-hmm. And some powers that be asked me to put together something, and this is basically just a first crack at it, but I'm by no stretch an expert at this, Martin, and really wanted your feedback and to make things better, to make it good from day one. And of course, you probably haven't read the paper yet, and I'll throw it on my X feed, but it's incorporates 3 different phases. Phase 1 would be a dual currency of Canadian-US system, and that sort of allows us time as Albertans to put together trade swaps, lines of credit, things in place with the U.S., and think about what kind of exchange that we want to have for, you could make it as attractive as 1-for-1, an Alberta dollar 1-for-1 with the U.S. dollar. You'd have to fill in the gaps, but that's a nice little perk, a 40% perk for Albertans to change over to a new dollar. And in that time of phase 1, you can create an Alberta central bank. And what that central bank would basically do is in phase two is create an Alberta dollar, quadruped backed by gold, oil, U.S. treasuries, and Bitcoin. And that reserve would be in place for 30% of the currency. And really, the U.S. treasuries, I know it's not a great investment, but it does pander to what the U.S. is trying to do and really cater to what they're trying to do. And of course, gold and oil adding a lot of stability, and Bitcoin really being a technologically favored reserve currency, piece of the reserve. And so in that time, financial institutions would be capped with their lending based on the Alberta Central Bank reserves. That way you couldn't get ahead of yourselves and do too much lending and cause too much inflation. With the reserves in place, it would force sort of fiscal discipline on behalf of the central banks and on the governments. And part of the system in phase two would be able to keep gold and silver as legal tender. Whatever that might look like, but basically an off ramp in case there's more funny business that goes on down the road. And if any debt is issued out of the Alberta government going forward, have free floating rates, none of this quantitative easing stuff, and trying to control interest rates. And then phase three, moving into stability of the organization. And the Alberta Central Bank would keep reserves in place of 30% of the Alberta dollar. This is almost a two currency system in the end of what I have the idea of: a domestic dollar, so an Alberta dollar, and then anything international, you'd use the US dollar or the US dollar new stable coins for international trade. And then to put the icing on the cake of my grand requests for this new system of currency, a max debt to GDP of 20 to 30%. That's sort of the rundown of what it is. Martin, humble me, poke holes in this thing. Where did I go wrong? I'm going to furiously take notes and absolutely, we want this thing to work. And I know things haven't worked out when you've advised in the past, but maybe we're the exception.
Well, I would say, first of all, the number one mistake governments do make is that they try to fix their currency, peg it, or one way or another. And they tend to be academics rather than have any real trading experience. And I've tried to explain to them, to all various different governments, that when you fix a currency, it becomes a guaranteed trade. I can borrow $1 trillion, short your currency. You've pegged it. If I'm wrong, I get my money back. If I'm right, I make a fortune. All right? That's, what Soros did with the pound, etc. All right? So, but the main issue of a lot of people focus on the currency, but there's something much more significant behind what really makes the currency worth something. All right, the U.S. is the reserve currency mainly because it is the largest consumer-based economy. All right, Japan's got to sell its Toyotas here in dollars. Germany is BMWs or whatever. China has looked at the European model, which has been a disaster, and the United States. This is why China is trying to rebuild the Silk Road. They're trying to establish a consumer-based economy. All right, so that is the real wealth of a nation. Is not its gold reserves or anything of that nature. Just look at Japan and Germany, both rose from the ashes of World War II without reserves. All right, it's the productivity of the people. Now, I did testify on this when we were talking about, currency reforms, etc. Back in the 90s. I testified before the House Ways and Means Committee. And what I would recommend is this. More so even than worrying about the backing of the currency. All right, what you want to do is have maybe a maximum at 15%, preferably 10, on a corporate tax rate. All right. Hong Kong had a corporate tax rate of 15%. That's why so many companies went and established their headquarters there. Internationally, if there is no tax, then a company can be taxed back in its home district. So you want it to pay something. All right. One of the reasons I got to meet Margaret Thatcher was that I was restructuring multinational companies, particularly the Japanese wanted to get into Europe for the euro and all that stuff, and into the EU. And if they had, like all the auto manufacturers, etc., I was putting them in Britain. The airlines, I was putting them in Ireland to get the best tax deals. And I happen to have known Thatcher's personal advisor, Sir Alan Walters. And she had heard this rumor that there's this guy sending companies to Britain. And he says, yeah, that's Marty. Oh, you know him? So that's how I got to meet her. Maggie was probably the most intelligent head of state I ever met in my life. She asked me why I was sending them to Britain. I said, look, if I pay the employee the very same amount of money in Britain versus Germany, in Germany they have all these regulations on top of everything. The cost that the employee never sees is 40% more in Germany than in Britain. And she wasn't aware of that. What I would recommend is this, is that you want to attract companies, also, you have jobs, etc. All right. So maximum I would prefer to see is a 10% corporate tax. I would prefer to see no income tax on individuals. All right. That means an employee is going to see what he's actually earning. All right. And you do this. You fund your government basically with a consumption tax. Indirect. All right. That's what the founding fathers of the United States were suggesting. Okay. No direct income tax. Because then you find a $100 bill in the parking lot. Legally, you're supposed to call the government and say, do you want your 50%? So I would focus more on the economic side. The currency, it can be, don't fix it like Bretton Woods or something like that. What you can do for psychological reasons is say it's convertible, you can convert it to gold. Fine. Okay. But at a floating rate. The reason the gold standard fell is what governments will always do. You might sell the idea today, and then the next generation comes, and, they're just on another planet. And so the problem would be that if you look at Bretton Woods, I think a 3-year-old with a pocket calculator could figure out the gold standard was going to collapse. Because you fixed the dollar at 35, but you didn't limit the amount of dollars you were printing. So obviously, come on, you're going to have more dollars than you're going to have gold to back it up, and the whole thing collapses. That's why I say it should be floating. Because if you fix it, then you're not going to be able to expand the money supply without creating a Bretton Woods, crisis again. And, yes, there is inflation. but the money supply must increase at least in proportion to the economy and population. Otherwise, you end up with deflation. So if there's 20 people and $20, we all can have one. But now if there's 40 people, when there's still only $20, now we all have 50 cents. So you have to avoid that. That's what recessions and depressions are about, is deflation. When, it's a very simple concept, but a lot of academics don't tend to seem to get it. Whenever the future is uncertain, people hoard their money and they don't spend. All right? You spend your money. Look, there's all kinds of studies on real estate, for example. If you think your house has just doubled in value, you feel rich and you spend easier. If you think your house just collapsed in value by 50%, you're going to hold your money and not spend so easily. So this is a fact of humanity. It goes back to ancient times. So that's why in a recession, what happens is that the value of assets decline, and everybody wants cash, and the cash goes up. So the cash buys more assets at that point in time. When you're in a boom period, all right, you want to get rid of your cash as fast as possible and buy assets because they're going up. Yep. So it's really a scale between assets and money. They should really teach this in school, but.
Well, it's really interesting, and just even putting that lens on it, it's so you're basically putting the currency drivers in the hands of the population versus the government, which is very different, which is, I think you've nailed it, and sort of why you see money flows the way they do. Do you think, because Alberta is probably the most productive province within Canada, I think that's probably safe to say, and does oil being, the number one commodity in the world have sort of any factor a part of that, or do you always sort of start with the people that are being productive of driving sort of the economic benefit in the currency?
It really is the people. If you look objectively at Japan and Germany, they didn't have the oil. They didn't have the resources. If the people are productive, all right, that's the number one issue. I mean, Russia is the richest country in the world. They have 75 trillion in natural resources. All right, but they lack the rule of law. They lacked a lot of the structural things. If you just look at the resources that they have, in theory, they should have been the number one economy in the world. But you got to get that stuff out of the ground. You need the rule of law. Look, I was an international hedge fund manager. And the very first question you must ask, all right, is there a country risk? I wouldn't ever put money into like Iran because they confiscated, oil reserves, etc. Nigeria did the same thing. So if there is no trust in the government, that's the number one question. All right, I have to trust the government before I'm even going to invest $1. All right, so you need a good rule of law, and so that if I bought real estate in Alberta, I have to have confidence that there's a court that says, yes, that is yours. All right, rather than some guy comes in, sits down, now it's mine now. What do I do? All right. So the rule of law is very critical. When the rule of law evaporates, all right, because typically corruption, and then you end up with, investment starting to question what is right, what's wrong. Can I trust my money there? That has been part of the problem with foreign investment in China. They've understood that. So there were delegations came over to look at how the American court system worked, etc., to copy that. So they understood that. And so I would say you need a good, strong, rule of law. That is critical to attract foreign capital. And if you make it at 10%, and I say 10 mainly because others are at 15, you'll create an incentive to come there. Other companies that I have dealt with, and this is another mistake of governments. I put some into Macedonia. Why? Because I got a 25-year guarantee, no increase in taxes. All right, you can't expect a company to come in, spend $5 billion, build this plant. Okay, great. Your taxes are 10%. Oh, gee, I need some more money, so I'm going to raise it to 20% next month. A company has to have a viable business plan, as you know. So the tax rate, I would say, if you can do I would put that in the Constitution. Like here in Florida, it's in our Constitution, no income tax. There's only 7 states with no income tax. My father was a lawyer. I grew up with law, and his former law partner told me, he says, when I lived in New Jersey, he said, if you die here, tell your family, drag your body across the river before they tell anybody. Because they want 50% of what you earn while you're alive, and then 40% when you die.
So if I don't mean to oversimplify things, but so Brett builds a paper on a currency and is looking for holes to be poked in his theory on currency. And what I've heard you say is, don't worry about a currency. Attract investment. The way you do that is by tax rate, put it at 10%, incentivize people to move here by putting 0% income tax on people. And from that, an area will flourish. And the way to make sure that more comes is establish the rule of law. And by doing those things, you will make it a place that people want to be. And if you could do one step on that, you'd be like, when a business is coming, you put it in for 25 years, we're not going to increase your tax rate of 10%. Right. And now they know that for the next 25 years, as they build their business, this is what it's set at. They have a firm foundation, if you would, to set in. And actually, it's not about building an Alberta currency. It's about setting the structures properly so that people feel comfortable moving their money there.
Correct. I mean, the currency, you can, like I said, you can say, all right, fine, it's backed by gold on a floating basis. All right. Yep. If you want to give a level of comfort to the people, because you have a lot of people think, oh, currency should be backed by gold or whatever. That's very nice, but it's not really the economic issue. You have to be able to have a good economy. If you have a good economy, then everything flows from that. That's what is really behind the U.S. dollar. It's not the government per se, other than a rule of law. You look at the chart rate of the income tax in the United States back to it looks like the brainwave of a schizophrenic, Democrats come in, they raised it up to 90% at one point. Who wants to pay 90%? All right. Trump doesn't understand it. Take a look at the city of Detroit. It was the hub. That's where all the auto industry was. They all left. Why? Because they kept raising taxes. The city of Detroit couldn't fund its debt in 1937. They suspended, went basically bankrupt. They finally repaid their debt in 1963. Why? They kept, we're going to make a fortune. Just keep raising taxes. Yeah, I want to send my kid to this school, so raise taxes so I got it, it's, let's be honest about government. These people, the Marxists think that, if government, it owns everything, then we eliminate the corruption. Really? Sorry, human nature doesn't change. You put a guy in charge of a company, he's going to try and expand it. Okay? You put a guy in charge of the government, he's going to try and expand it. It's human nature. It doesn't change simply because you work for the government versus the private sector. We're all the same. So I would say that just focus more on the economy side. You want to drag in as many people as possible. And I mean, you establish something like that, I'd open an office in Alberta. All right? It's trade, etc. Trump doesn't understand all this stuff about, U.S. lost manufacturing, but it's not that I'm paying somebody $2 an hour cheaper over there than here. I've dealt with companies globally. That's not the issue. The issue is stability and taxation. All right, you raise your taxes from 20% to 40%. It doesn't change what I'm paying an employee. I'm moving. All right, it's it's like anything else. I mean, you have to understand this. It's the Marxists. The biggest problem with them is the Marxist theory of that nothing has any value unless it is, labor involved in it. And that's just simply not true. There's some things that do not necessarily take labor to have a value to it. And there's demand. One of the famous, things of it, utility value, things of this nature. There's a lot more complicated issues that are in there. The guy that came up with supply and demand theory was John Law. All right. And you can read his book, and he came up with this idea of, he explained the difference between water and diamonds. Diamonds have no real value, but the demand for a diamond over water, which is everybody needs, all right, is worth less than something that has no real value to it, other than it looks pretty. So he's trying to explain this stuff, and he came up with his paradox of water versus diamonds. Coming up with supply and demand. That's where it all comes from. So I would just, understand that to create the best possible outcome for Alberta, all right, also look at the economy side. The currency, I would say to give confidence to a lot of people, you have resources, etc. I would say, fine, it's backed by gold, but on a floating basis.
Yeah, I did get that part right. I did float that gold in there.
Yes.
but
no, what you're doing is fine. I did read your paper. There is a transition. I think what you did is good. I'm just saying that there is dealing with multinational, and from Middle East, Europe, Asia, all over. They all act the same way, all right? And everybody will take an action in their own self-interest. So when it's to their benefit, they will show up.
You're absolutely right, because we see the productivity declining in Canada because it might be bang on. It's like we've just lost that rule of law like we have. And we see it with our neighboring province in BC, where, there's serious skepticism where people actually own the land or not. And so
Yeah.
as a financial institution, I can't lend on that. And it's like, sorry, you don't know if you're in a lease or you actually own the land. I can't lend on that. Sorry. And
That was
so
the most stupid legal decision I've ever heard.
Well, and the thing with the Cowichan legal decision, you're seeing it spread now across Canada, right? You're seeing that idea spread. Now, there's going to be, as Barry Kirkham, the lawyer who's been on the show, folks, has said, like there's certain areas where it has a more legal standing because of treaties signed versus not signed, all this jazz. But regardless, that decision in BC, in Richmond, the Cowichan tribe, is spreading all across BC, and it's going to spread. You're seeing it start to be talked about all across Canada. And if you go back to what Martin's talking about, if I'm a company that is in Canada and I'm looking at Canada, I'm hearing they're gonna do away with, or they're gonna, fee simple title maybe doesn't mean what it's always meant. All of a sudden, if I'm an investor, I'm unsure of it, and the government can pay me however how many billions they want. And you're seeing this play out over and over again in Canada, where they come in, they take the money, and then all of a sudden they go defunct, or they move their headquarters somewhere else. They take the government money and they just leave. And I would think that investment is not only drying up, it's running away from Canada at this point, because there is no certainty that anything really exists. The rule of law, the rule of ownership of private property, like all these things are coming into question.
Yeah, I just had one client who came down to our conference, and he's got a place in BC, and he wanted to resell his house to retire, and he can't.
wow. Yeah.
It's that's what I mean about the rule of law. I mean, if that decision was so brain dead, and there's no other way to put it. Clear, the problem is they may understand some legal aspect, but I mean, look, you have an argument in the United States that technically the income tax is unconstitutional. All right. If you really ruled strictly on that issue, you would be correct. However, no court's going to say, oh, yes, it's unconstitutional, because then they lose all their salaries. So, I mean, there's a practical side to this versus, and in BC, they did not take the practical side. I don't know if they are just brain dead or what, but you undermine that rule of law. Is this house mine or is it not? It gets to be really crazy.
What about the idea of just using the interim currency for full time, just using the US dollar as our currency in Alberta? Because I know there's been conversations that happened at the State Department in the United States, and they're all for sort of taking a look at this as long as we win, a constitutional majority to separate from Canada. Should we just leave and say, hey, we're just going to use the U.S. currency from now on, and it can just take care of itself?
You can peg it to the $.
Well, I'm not even talking about pegging it. I'm just saying, yeah, we'll just use U.S.
Or
dollar.
just use dollars. That's fine. The downside to it is that you are then importing whatever the inflation or deflationary aspects of the United States into Alberta. So the Fed raises interest rates because of some issue that would then affect Alberta. What you have to understand is that when, as I said at Sean's last conference, the Federal Reserve was originally created absolutely brilliantly. All these different branches, but they're all independent. All right, because you do have regional capital flows. You had agriculture, they need money when it's time to plant. When they sell it, then they got excess, etc. So I saw that in Canada also back then. They were raising interest rates to fight real estate speculation in Toronto. And meanwhile, they were putting farmers and miners into bankruptcy in Alberta. All right. One size does not fit all. So that's the only caution I would make on that. That you import whatever the economic trend is from the United States into Alberta.
It's funny you say that. It's funny you say that because I had the benefit or misbenefit of actually asking Mark Carney a question about 8 years ago. And this was at the time when Alberta wasn't doing so well and Toronto was doing very well and BC was doing very well. And it's like, well, have you ever thought about having different interest rates for the regions of Canada? And he sort of gave me this song and dance about, well, it's more or less like a bathtub and you can't fill one area of the bathtub farther than the other area of the bathtub. And I didn't really like that answer, but that's just funny that is really probably the better way to do things.
Yeah, look, he's not that's what I mean. He has no real experience. Just because he was the head of a central bank doesn't mean anything. You have to, actually be in the trenches and see how capital moves. And like I said, the Federal Reserve, if you just have one bathtub, then why do we need all these branches? All right, they shut, and there were two major problems. One, when the Fed was set up, it stimulated the economy because, and the reason it had this title of lender of last resort was that you got a company, you went to borrow, and the bank's in trouble, so they're not lending any money. So you would then issue a 90-day paper. The Fed would buy that. So it was a direct stimulus to the economy. Now you have the funds to pay your employees. You don't have to lay them off. Okay, that was the design. World War I came, and our politicians said, oh, no longer buy corporate paper, you buy our paper because we have to fund for the war. And then they never put it back. All right? Roosevelt then comes in. Oh, well, I want to put in this New Deal. I want one interest rate for everybody. So he usurps in 1935 the Federal Reserve. Creates a Fed chairman that he appoints, one size fits all out of Washington. All right, Toronto is basically following that model. It is insane. It does not function properly. All right, it ignores the regional differences that we have. That's the real issue in Canada and why Alberta in the West should separate from the East. It's a different economy. All right, and you have Carney. In all honesty, I've looked at everything he said. He was part of climate change and we have to save the planet. And all of a sudden, he's not. He's signing a deal for pipelines. Do you stand for anything or you just change whatever you say with the wind? Did you believe any of that stuff that you said before? I mean, I don't know. I don't know where he stands, honestly. But very nice signing an agreement for a pipeline for Alberta. Sounds great. Does he then shut it down 6 months from now or what? Because the birds are dying or something else. I mean, it's kind of hard to say. But
there's more holes in that than there is in my currency paper. So there you
go. But so I would just say, look at the economic side. I'd be glad to help. No problem. my view is that if we can get one country to adopt this idea, we don't need the income tax. That is a Marxist type thing. Like I say, you find a $100 bill in a parking lot. Legally, you're supposed to call the government and say, here's your 50%, It should be a consumption tax and indirect. That's what the founding fathers basically said in the United States. No direct taxation. Because it sounds nice. Oh, we're only going to tax the rich. Okay, how do I know you're not rich? You got to file and say I'm not. What's the legal implication? If you fail to file, that's a criminal act. If you file and say, well, I can't pay, that's not. They can't put you in prison for not paying your taxes. They put you in prison for not telling them that you owe it. Substantial difference. That's how they get around the Constitution, right? That's why I say no income tax. Then you don't have to report everything you're doing.
If you all of a sudden, every Albertan, Brett, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but you went no income tax, what does that drop them? Every person listening to this, what are they paying right now in income tax?
Oh, yeah, I'd say at the very least, probably 20% of the income. I did work down in the Cayman Islands at one point where they don't have any tax, and I was just baffled. It's like, here's your salary divided by 12, there's your check for the month. And it's absolutely baffling how much they take off with CBP, EI, type things like that. But there is a consumption tax down.
I would say it's higher than 20%. I would say I'm almost certain it's higher than 20%, but maybe I'm wrong on that. But if every Albertan, listen to this, got 20% more in their pockets, and then you flipped it around and said, well, all we're going to do is have a consumption tax, which I assume means, Martin, when you go buy things, there's just a tax on everything. Well, I mean, heck, there's already a sales tax. You go buy liquor, Brett could laugh at this, right? Every April 1st, our sales tax on liquor goes up every year. It's an escalator tax. You're already paying all these things, and you're saying if you did away and you had 30, or well, I don't know, Brett's number 20%, I'm going to say 30%, somewhere in there. If you had that money in your pocket, what are you going to do? You're going to buy things. And then that consumption tax gets funneled back to help support the infrastructure of the country. That's a very interesting thought, Martin.
Look, I'm here in Florida. We have no income tax. We just have a retail sales tax, all right, and a property tax. But the governor's even trying to get rid of that now. But we have a balanced budget. It can be done. It's not, the problem with politicians is that they don't want to reform. I need more money, just raise the taxes. That's basically what they always do. And there is a level of resistance. Like I said, just look at the city of Detroit, where all the cars began. There's nobody there. Everybody left. All right, there's a classic. Look, the same thing, the city of Mainz in Germany. All right, that's where the Gutenberg press was. All right, 14th century. Same thing. They start raising taxes. Oh, this is a boom. We're going to make a fortune. Even Gutenberg left. The city ends up bankrupt. All right. The Pope even excommunicates the politicians. All right. And then the city gets sacked by its creditors because it defaulted. I mean, it's the same story over and over and over again. It's not my personal opinion. It's this is just the way it is. You put somebody in government, once they have that power, they don't want to hand it back. So the key is making sure that you do a constitution. I mean, look, if I do insider trading, it's 20 years in jail. I can tell you they're trying to put through a bill in on Capitol Hill to outlaw politicians from insider trading. What have I heard? I've said, listen, I wish you all the best of luck. All right? Well, how am I going to pay for my child's tuition if I can't trade stock? I go to jail for 20 years. You get to be a multimillionaire. And how they're virtually bankrupt when they go in and they come out multimillionaires all the time.
Yeah. Martin, I appreciate you giving us some time today. Brett, appreciate you hopping on, and I hope it's enlightened you on a few things. Either way, gentlemen, I appreciate you hopping on and doing this. I think there's some things to chew on there. Yeah, thanks again, Martin, for giving us a little extra time today.
Yeah. No problem. If you need any help, Brett, no problem.
No, thanks for that. We look forward to you having your office here in Alberta, so that'll be nice.
Well, and I tell you what, before then, we look forward to having Martin back at the Cornerstone Forum in March. That's going to be going on in Calgary. So, and if anybody's listening and is going, holy crap, I should grab a ticket for that. Early bird prices are on until December 31st. Go grab a ticket today. Anyways, there's my sales pitch. Gentlemen, thanks for hopping on.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and good luck up there.